Ever wonder why some marketing just works? There's a secret sauce for every brand. We can help you find yours. We're IDEA. It's in our name. It's what we do. Find us at theideabrand.com.
Thanks for joining us on the Voice of San Diego podcast in partnership with News Radio 600 Kogo. I am Scott Lewis, the editor-in-chief at Voice. I am joined by the worst journalist in the world, Andrew Keats.
What's up, buddy?
That was off script.
That was, it said the best journalist in the world. I'm not going to just read it like Ron Burgundy.
I prefer what you've done here.
Okay. And Sara Libby, our managing editor, never says anything about Sara.
Yeah, they're terrifying.
They're scared of Sara.
It's great.
And I don't know if I said I'm Scott Lewis.
We've
Important.
established.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, coming up today, the San Diego Republican Party. Another one bites the dust.
Yeah.
They lost another seat, another representative, and not because they were not elected, just because they didn't want to be Republicans anymore. San Dieg has really pulled the curtains back on a dispute that was haunting it for a long time. Rural versus urban is now clear. San Dieg versus the county supervisors is now clear. We've got some updates on their bold new transportation vision. Bold.
You know it's bold.
You know it's bold.
When they write it into the title.
Yeah, that's a good way to make sure somebody knows that what you've done is bold.
Set in bold as well.
We also have a follow-up about a sexual misconduct case we've been uncovering and investigating at Mar Vista High. And later we talked to Fran Butler-Cohen. Remember the homeless navigation center that we have sometimes analyzed on this show? We never just...
That's a fair characterization of what we've talked about.
Well, Fran Butler-Cohen is the CEO of the Family Health Centers of San Diego, and it's her job and their job to take that over and make that skydiving center a navigation center for the homeless. And we talked to her about that. And I got to say, Sara and I interviewed her, and she wrecked us.
Yeah.
She wrecked us. She straight up wrecked us.
Not like she owned us. She just, like, everything she said was so powerful that we were kind of speechless.
I could have probably listened to her for like half hour. It was that good. So, I mean...
how long did you listen
yeah,
to
that's
her?
what I mean.
About how long our interviews are.
Sorry, I meant like hours and hours.
As opposed to the 22
really
minutes
emphasized
that you
it there.
actually interviewed her for.
And finally, we have a People's Reporter episode on what you can and can't recycle. Okay. It happened. San Diego City Councilman Mark Kersey announced he was leaving the Republican Party. He didn't want to take any questions about it. I know because I asked if he wanted to talk about it, and they said very eloquently back to me, no, we don't. That'll do it. He's registering as a no-party preference voter. He wants to be independent. He said, look, my record is independent. Make no mistake, both parties have plenty of good and decent people. But today's political climate rewards ideologues, not problem solvers. I ran for office to rebuild San Diego, not localize the debate over federal and state partisan malice. You know, a few months ago, somebody had texted me a photo of him sitting at a diner with a bunch of Democrats. And they're like, oh, my God, is this happening? And I checked it out. And they're like, no, some people just talk to other parties. It happens. You know, don't have to worry about it too much. Didn't think this would happen.
This confirms my hot take, which is that all rumors are true.
That is a hot take.
All rumors are true. He didn't actually become a Democrat. We should be clear. He's staying independent. My decision is based not on a single issue or vote, but something I've been wrestling with for some time now. I suspect there was probably something that triggered it to happen. One option might be that he's considering running for mayor. That he hasn't said no yet.
Yeah, the part about that, though, is like, I don't think that the lesson that you would draw from having watched somebody run for mayor without a party affiliation is that it's a good way to become mayor.
So let's compare. You're talking about Nathan Fletcher, 2012, in the middle of the race. He's seeing himself not not win. He's also been flirting with the idea of becoming independent for a while, he says. And he says, well, let's pull the trigger now and see if that helps.
Yeah.
He pulls the trigger. It did not help. Maybe a little.
Yeah, I mean, who knows what he would have gotten had he not done that, but he ended up in third place.
But it wasn't even that long, though. He didn't give it that long. Like, this is a year and a half.
Yeah, I mean, but I also don't think you could look at the 2018 election and think a great way to get elected in San Diego is to be a Republican.
That's true as well. But the lesson I took from the Fletcher thing was just how difficult, how real the structural hurdles to overcome as an independent are. Those are real advantages in terms of member communications, the ways you can receive large lump sums of money from the party, that you can that you have like a structural turnout apparatus to lean on and help you actually bring people to the polls. Not having any of those things makes it really hard to get past a certain number of voters who are dialed in and hear from you.
Well, Fletcher was I call it Nathan Fletcher twice. He ran and then he got hit from both sides, right? The Labor Democrats hit him and the Republicans hit him, and he got squeezed and he didn't find a path to the general. But in this case, there is no Republican running yet. So would that fire come from the right necessarily? And he hasn't necessarily, from what I can tell yet, ostracized folks on the right for whatever reason to the same extent. So obviously this isn't going to help. They're probably going to be fired up about it. But I don't know. It just doesn't seem like it's quite the same dynamic. But I also don't see exactly how it helps him get across for sure.
Well, it's almost like choosing which race you want an advantage in, because obviously you have to first run in the primary. And in that case, like having the institutional backing of the party and the money and all of that might help you get past, one of two Democrats, but then you're almost guaranteed to lose in the general. And so I would guess that switching would harm him in the primary, but help him in the general.
I don't know. Is that true? Because in the general, if he's an independent, maybe everybody who's not a Democrat, rallies around it. I'm not saying it'd be easy by any means.
Yeah.
But if the Democrat is somehow portrayed as out of step, and then this is the only option, I don't know.
So we should pump the brakes a little bit. He hasn't
said
said that he's running for mayor. We have no indication really that that's what's happening here.
Well, so another potential reason I thought that might have done this was Carl DeMaio just didn't let him sleep. Remember, Carl DeMaio threatened him after.
This is his way. He's like, I have to sleep.
Yeah, he's like,
this onslaught has been too much for me to bear, and I must lay my head down and rest.
City Councilman Kersey is a representative also on the airport authority. The airport authority was, of course, trying to decide whether to have a project labor agreement on the redesign and rebuild of Terminal 1, big, huge, $3 billion project. And, the labor unions wanted an agreement on work and how that would go there. And the night before, Kersey posted a note he got from Carl DeMaio saying, if you vote for that labor agreement, I'll bash you every day I can on the radio, and we'll do social media ads, and you won't get a moment's rest. So maybe he is searching for a night's sleep.
This is him laying his sword down. It's hard. I think this is significant. I'll take a leap and say that I think this experience was a significant one. The timing of it, it was just a few weeks ago. I think what I heard from him, I listened to that meeting at the time, and what I heard from his comments was a frustration that he was expected to take a doctrinaire stance on this. So what he actually said about his vote was, I oppose certain project labor agreements, but I've never been opposed to all of them. And I think he said in this specific case, what he was swayed by was the fact that the person paying for this project primarily is going to be the airlines that called the terminal home, and they were okay. Those private companies were okay with a project labor agreement. And so his perspective was, if they're okay with it, why should we come in and say no? Now, I think you could dispute that from the non-union contractor's perspective, is that they're being shut out of public work improperly. So I don't know that they'll be swayed on that. But his perspective seemed to be, why do I not have the privilege of having a nuanced view here, that some of these things could be okay in some certain circumstances and others are bad in other circumstances.
And then I think the last potential idea of what might have triggered this is over the weekend after the awful terrorist attack at the synagogue in Poway. And there was some partisan sniping right away, especially from the head of the Republican Party, called a relatively benign, this is a time, this is enough gun violence from Congressman Scott Peters. And he called that a shameful politicization of the whole situation. And maybe it's something like that triggered it, because it came out a couple days later. So big change. The chairman of the Republican Party, Kravarik, told the UT that the Democrats, he's not worried about Democrats. He said Democrats are the ones that are acting too arrogant, and that ever ends well, because they're led by President Trump, who's known for his humility and grace with opponents. So, all right, next item up, we have since we last recorded, tension between the urban and rural areas that had been bubbling but below the surface in San Diego erupted in full-blown political fight. So this all revolves around the bold new vision.
Yes. So Hassan Akrada, as we had suspected last week, announced the broad strokes of his plan to bring fast, high-frequent transit access across the region, and at the same time expressed his desire to amend Transnet, the scandalized tax program that we've been writing about for a few years now, and wanted to kill the 15 projects that are part of that have not broken ground yet, and reappropriate $300 million to start studying some transit that has severely bothered some North and East County representatives who feel that a promise has been broken, that they were promised expansions of freeways in their communities, and they do not like the idea that that's not going to happen. So there was some real tension on display at the Sandag meeting after he did that. That carried over through the weekend, and eventually on Tuesday, the County Board of Supervisors, led by County Supervisor Kristen Gaspar and County Supervisor Jim Desmond, both of whom sit on Sandag, asking their colleagues on the board to repudiate this plan and essentially say nah to all of it, which they did, but only on a 3-2 vote, where Nathan Fletcher, who represents the city, and Greg Cox, who represents the South Bay, two areas that I guess you could say would benefit most from a more transit-focused plan, broke with the rest of their colleagues and said, no, we do not agree with you. And so I think that puts in contrast the way these things are going to be playing out from a political perspective going forward.
Yeah, so you used to write about, I remember one of the stories you did maybe like 6 or 7, 5 years ago was this idea of all votes at Sandag had been unanimous, right, for years, even like relatively controversial things. And now we're seeing that that's not going to be the case going forward.
I mean, it's at least the case right now, or it's been the case lately in a way that it never was before. And I was always fascinated by that, because you would see these people who would be part of heated debates when they were at City Hall, when they were on the city councils that they serve in. And you'd have somebody like Todd Gloria who would propose a ambitious climate plan that would split in some ways between Democrats and Republicans. That's actually not true. I mean, before Republicans start pointing out that they supported the climate action plan, you would have proposals that would sometimes split on partisan lines on the city council, and then they would go to Sandag, and suddenly, somehow, everyone would agree. Big cities, small cities, urban cities, rural cities, Democrats, Republicans, somehow were always in complete agreement when it came to decisions at Sandag, and that never made a great deal of sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, even in the run-up to Measure A, I remember some of those North County leaders saying, we're only on board with this if we get our fair share of projects in the mix. And so those tensions certainly always existed, and they just never kind of showed up at Sandag.
Yes, and so one thing you've been saying, Scott, that I think is true is that this is healthier. Actually allowing this to play out, that there is a debate about the best way to spend public money on transportation projects, and different people have different views on it, and we should actually talk that through instead of keeping this all buried. And
well, even worse, like it seems like that consensus was actually kind of built on maybe a mild fraud, in the sense of like, they didn't have the money. that built that consensus. Part of what they're dealing with is that those highway projects that are being lost or being proposed to be cut right now are on there because they don't have the money for them, right? And so the question is, if they don't cut those, what else are they going to cut? And so, I think that, they could, maybe in the past they would have just said, don't worry, we're going to be able to do everything, or somehow make it all okay. I think, the other thing that stood out for me, I remember covering Transnet in 2004. This was the extension of the half-cent sales tax. It was a big deal. They needed 2/3 of the vote. They needed everybody on board. County Supervisor Diane Jacob was against it precisely because she said it didn't promise those projects. It didn't guarantee those highway projects. And now she's saying, you promised those projects. And it's like, yeah, but the reason you oppose it too was because there was this provision that you could change it. There's nothing illegal happening here.
Yeah, this was the debate at the county. Was Fletcher and Cox were saying it's written directly into the measure that 2/3 of the board can change the spending for Transnet. And I thought Greg Cox made a good point, which was, in fact, San Diegans board's already done it. They amended Transnet a few years ago to purchase the South Bay Expressway after the private company that built it went into bankruptcy, and they saw an opportunity to make a wise financial investment by their assessment, and they bought it. And he said nobody seemed to think that we were breaking trust of voters at that time because it was allowed. Diane Jacobs' point was basically, sure, it's in the measure and it's allowed, and nod, wink, wink. I actually was quite vocal about opposing that possibility back at the time. But I think she said basically a typical voter didn't read that far into the ballot, and they certainly perceived these as promises.
I mean, at the heart, we can talk about promises all we want, but at the heart is they want highways, and
yes,
they don't like transit.
Yes, this is not much as we've learned with Measure L in San Diego. Yeah. Your process concerns extend exactly as far as they prohibit you from doing what you want to do.
Yeah, they want highways, and two of the five want more transit, and that's why this race to replace Gaspar, or if she wants to run again, is going to be a very important one, because that 3-2 could switch.
Yeah, although I will say that.
Oh, it might not. Yeah.
And just. Desmond and Gaspar are already on the Sandag board, so this whole county vote was kind of an odd charade to me.
Because they can vote how they want. I've never understood that. So if you're on the Sandag board, you don't have to have like marching orders from your council to decide how to vote. No, you're just the rep.
You're the rep.
Yeah. Huh. Fascinating. All right, our third news item for the week. In 2016, a volunteer in Mar Vista High's JROTC program emailed 7 school officials with detailed evidence that an instructor in the program was sexually abusing a student. None of them responded, and it wasn't until the student went to police herself that the school took any action. The Sweetwater Union High School District told us recently that the reason they didn't act was because the email went to everyone's spam folder.
Yeah, which is a reason, I guess.
Yeah.
So as we've been investigating these sexual misconduct cases, obviously we've been doing it for long enough that a lot of trends have emerged. And in this case and some others, including, the La Jolla High case that we've been talking about recently, where the district and officials determined that a crime might have taken place, no one ended up reporting these things to police. And so we've been getting a lot of feedback of, aren't these people all mandated reporters? And the answer is yes. There is a state law that requires school officials, not just teachers, but officials, coaches, almost everybody who works at a school, if you have a reasonable suspicion that a child's being abused somehow, you are required to report it either to county welfare workers or to the police. And school police do not count as part of that law. So San Diego Unified has its own police force, but that would not count under the law. And they just, don't do it. They choose to keep it in-house and respond themselves, or not respond at all. And what Kayla Jimenez has found is that it turns out there's really no consequence whatsoever for not reporting these cases, even though you're required to. So she talked to Summer Steffen, the district attorney, and she told her that her office has not prosecuted a case in the last 2 decades that it checked for failing to report abuse. She also said she's very passionate about the mandated reporting law and cares about it a great deal, just has never gone after somebody who's violated it. And it turns out, most prosecutors all around the state have either never prosecuted somebody for failing to report abuse or have done so only, like a handful of times. I think there was a principal in San Jose area who, failed to report abuse and was prosecuted. And that's like one of very few cases that we were able to find.
Well, there's a fiduciary failure here too as well. This story came from our reporting about a settlement that this school district, Sweetwater, had to pay to this woman's family, right?
Yes.
And the settlement was because they should have known.
Yes.
That this person, they should have better looked into his background, because there were some other concerns as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, he had an incident at Coronado High where he was employed, and so she made the case that they should have known that he had issues if they had looked into his background, which they did not inquire with Coronado about his employment there. So yeah, absolutely, there's a lot of financial consequences as well as the obvious moral failing.
Yeah, and boiling it all off, the whole point of so much of the passion we've had around investigating this is not acting on these things mean that more people get hurt.
Yes.
And the systems are clearly not in place to make sure that doesn't happen. Kayla Jimenez has done some great reporting on that. She followed it. That was a very sensitive story she did, and this follow-up about the spam folder thing, and then the follow-up about the mandated reporter situation across the state. It's all very disturbing. On the other side of the break, coming up on the second half of the show, we sat down, Sara and I, with Fran Butler-Cohen, the CEO of Family Health Centers of San Diego, and talked about the situation and the overall status of homelessness in San Diego and what she does, and also that big plan for the Navigation Center downtown.
Hey there, this is Nate John. I produce this show every week, and I'd like your help. Here at Voice, we rely on listeners and readers like you to make our work possible. We're a small investigative journalism nonprofit. We don't want to be accountable to anyone except for you. So if you could take a minute while the team is on a short break and make a donation, it'd go a long way. Just head to voiceofsandiego.org and click the donate button, and thank you. Okay, back to the show.
We are joined in the Great Voice San Diego podcast studio by Fran Butler-Cohen. She is the CEO of Family Health Centers in San Diego. Welcome, Fran.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming in. All right, help us understand what Family Health Centers is. First of all, we have a lot of questions about some of the work you're doing in the community, some of the things you've written about and talked about, but just give us a lay of the land right now.
So Family Health Centers is a half a century old. We've been providing care, medical care primarily, to people that are low income or that have no income for decades. And we provide everything from pediatrics to adult medicine to dental care to mental health, everything in the way of primary care and also a lot of specialty care. So we probably are pushing somewhere close to 1 million health contacts a year.
Well, we had you in today. You're at the center of a lot of issues in the region right now. There's you're helping provide some of the services for the safe parking lots that people can stay in. You're helping. You're going to transform the former indoor skydiving center. We've made fun of on this show a little bit here and there, but you're the one tasked with changing that into a place that homeless folks can find services and other things. And you're at the center of a really interesting discussion about numbers about the homelessness crisis in San Diego. Tell me a little bit about that. I want to reference specifically a piece you wrote, I can't tell exactly how long ago, but you basically said Family Health Services in San Diego served over 27,000 unique homeless persons in San Diego County, which is an interesting number considering that the regional task force puts the actual count of homeless people at something like 9,000. So help us understand what's going on there.
So I think where this got started, and I've done a lot of research on it because it certainly intrigues me too, is that the regional task force is beginning to recognize, and I've talked with the regional task force, that this is a point in time. They obviously know that. This is a 4-hour count that goes on in the city of San Diego. Unfortunately, you're trying to count people that are not wanting to be seen. So other municipalities, other cities pretty much look at that as a snapshot. They don't look at that number as their floor or their ceiling. And San Diego has historically always looked at that number as the end-all and be-all number. And from that point, then they plan. So the problem is other academic institutions or other think tank institutions know very well that that point-in-time count is either 2.5 or 10.2, somewhere along that range, times the number of the point-in-time count for any given city, depending on where you're at. So it really doesn't make any sense to use that as a planning document or planning number. What makes sense is to say this is the point-in-time count and then look at other means to gauge how many homeless we have in our community. I'm a firm believer that if you know what your problem is and you know the full scope of it, now we can start measuring and improving. Before then, it's just smoke and mirrors. We're playing with this 8,000 and 9,000 number, which is really a fabrication of what exists out there. And most people that I talk to, they'll tell you how homelessness has grown. They have very visual memories of what it was like 20 years ago or 30 years ago or even 5 years ago compared to what it is nowadays. So I think that people are very understanding of the fact that that's not the accurate number.
Do you have a opinion at all on what a better way to get at the actual number would be?
Well, I don't think there's a better way to get to it by going out and counting people in a 4-hour period. Understandably, this is a noble undertaking, and I mean that sincerely, that people get up at 2 and 3 in the morning to go out there and to count numbers and try to give a face to a problem. But there's so many limitations where they can go. And in the past, there's been limitations with what can't be provided. For instance, I work with a lot of hospitals in San Diego County, and those numbers go uncounted. And at any given time, you'll find that hospitals will have 20, 30, 40 homeless people in their daily census, and those people go uncounted. The jails, for people that are ready to be released, those go uncounted. Those are effectively homeless people. And if their home of origin is San Diego and they're low-level offenders, they will be released. And so it's very tough to get the actual number. You can't, for volunteer safety, you can't go into abandoned warehouses and dark underpasses on bridges and canyons simply because we don't want to put our volunteers in harm's way. But at the same time, that's where a lot of the encampments are. And when our staff go to the encampments, whether it's to do hepatitis vaccines or to do outreach, this is where we find the bulk of the people, not just sleeping in alcoves downtown.
What happens that's negative because of the count? What are the consequences of seeing this incorrectly? Well,
the point-in-time count is kind of funny because there's funding that comes to a city, but it's almost an inverse type of funding, because if you have less homeless, then there's possibility of getting incentive money that comes to your city. So you're not really incentivized for creating the right number. If someone came out and said, oh my Lord, we've got 50,000 homeless people in San Diego, the response in government is, what the heck happened to San Diego? Not, okay, great, we've got a number that we can start with. So I think that from the standpoint of when you open the doors of government and you truly want to work with your community and solve a problem, then you've got to start with honesty and openness, and you've got to accept the fact that the problem is far bigger than any of us ever thought it would be. I'm a long-term San Diegan, and I remember when I was a young woman, we would go out and surf in the morning, have coffee with friends, and still get to work on time. And we knew that there was one homeless person in our community. We thought he was homeless. And he gathered all the cans and bottles. And that was all we had. San Diego has radically changed, and we're not, in some ways, America's finest city anymore. It hurts. It hurts for people that remember what it was like. But it also hurts when you know people aren't being forthcoming with the social problem that we do have, and the fact that it is a result of multiple failures: education, healthcare, mental health, prisons, judicial system. And this has all been created over, I would say, 4 decades, the growth. And yet we still hold on to this 8,000 or 9,000 number.
Let's talk about that navigation center. So to orient folks, there's an indoor skydiving center that went belly up in East Village, not too far from the Petco Park. And there was an idea to transform that, and the mayor moved fast to purchase the building and transform it into a navigation center for the homeless. There was some providers who didn't want to be a part of it, but you guys stepped up and wanted to do it. Why?
Well, I think it's, as you mentioned earlier, it's the almost 27,000 people that we provide health care to, and it's very frustrating to provide health care to people when you know they're not going to get better, not because of what you are doing, it's because of the environment that they go back to. You know, if you give them medication that they have to take with meals, or medication that has to be refrigerated, or dressing changes that have to be done several times a day, you know, this is not conducive to healing with a homeless person. So I think we just realized that we had all these skills. We do have a healthcare for homeless project that we've operated since 1988, where we do street case management. We refer people for housing. We're working with them on various issues, linkages to care. We realized that we just had to step up and do it. The building, would I have chosen a skydiving center? No. I probably would not have chosen that. It's almost a 25 or 30,000 square foot building with only about 16,000 square feet of usable space. But I've looked at this issue, and I certainly have heard the criticism. But when you talk with the police, and you talk with the HOT teams, and you talk with our providers and our street outreach teams, and they say it is in the right location. The police department, the HOT team says it's the epicenter of homelessness and drug substance use with the homeless. So, you know, from that standpoint, I think Mayor Faulkner made the right decision. And I know it was a tough vote. You know, it was a 5-4 vote on the city council. But nonetheless, you got to start somewhere. So I think not from a financial standpoint, not from a skydiving center, but from where it's sited, that's where we're having the issues.
The Navigation Center is kind of sold as this one-stop shop where people can get a lot of services in one place. But some of the most successful navigation centers elsewhere in the country are one-stop shops in the sense that there is housing on site and there are also services, and so they're kind of all in the same place. Can you talk about the decision behind not having housing in this navigation center and what you think of that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because one thing I've done since taking over this navigation center as the operator, city's operator, is a tremendous amount of research. I've flown to Boston to look at their recuperative care project. I've looked at Seattle's. I think you're referring to Seattle's, where
I think San Francisco also.
San Francisco has one where they have in residents, and they don't stay long, you know, generally speaking, but it acts as a bridge to something else. So we have something that's a little bit different in San Diego. Dan Shea, Pete Seidler, and other philanthropists came together with the Bridge Housing Project. So we've got 3 of those tents that have gone up. But the one thing that it sticks with me is none of these, and you're talking about the navigation center where people are sleeping, none of those kinds of models will address the incredible degree of a problem that we have. So what we have done is that we have decided as an organization, with our board support, is property that we own, we're going to construct housing on it. And we're exploring right now container units. So these are the shipping container units. And quite frankly, I think they are very cool. They're very urban, hip units. We're looking at designing right now efficiency units. one bedroom or studios, and then up to 2 bedrooms for, say, single moms with young kids. And those can be stacked, as I understand, in some of our areas where we own property up to 3 levels. I'd like to see them be able to go up to 7 levels, which the structural engineers tell us that we can if the city would waive the height limitations for those. And if people have property like that they are interested in constructing themselves and helping their way out of the problem of homelessness, not just talking about it or complaining about it, but I think that we would be able to build at least 200 or 300 units, and that's probably more than what we would ever be able to house in the Navigation Center. The Navigation Center is also not set up for overnight sleeping. Again, it's only about 16,000 square feet of usable space, limited bathrooms, limited laundry facilities.
If you're a homeless person, you're struggling on the streets, you decide you need help, you walk into this facility, what will happen? What will it be like?
Well, the experience should be nice. It should be very customer friendly. They will come in and they will instantly be escorted to a navigator, case manager. They'll be enrolled in the program. It's not a drop-in center, so I want to make that very clear. But they will be enrolled in the program. I want to go on a little side here because I read the recent report that came out from San Diego County Taxpayers Association, where they talk about how there's been a 2,000% increase in homeless expenditures in the last few years, and yet there's no measurement. We have no ability to measure. Yeah. You know, my background, my educational background, has a lot to do with statistics and numbers. So that is one of the beauties of the Navigation Center, is when people come in and they get registered, everything is going to be classified in units of service. And we're going to find out when we're finished, and at the end of the day, what is the true cost. Because people will be profiled, the users will be profiled into their need areas, their background, how we're going to get them into housing, and then we're going to figure out what does it take to measure, what does it take to track true costs, and what does it take to get a person into housing. We're still thousands of units short in San Diego. And even if Family Health Center of San Diego builds 300 units, that's just merely a drop in the bucket. We're working with Steve Coe, who's head of community psychiatry with UCSD. We're working with Dr. Leslie Lewis, who's a cultural anthropologist at UCSD as well. And what we're going to do is develop these profiles, develop the tracking, and measure, and then we will have a public portal. So people will be able to see our activities. I'm committed to transparency and accountability. They'll see how many units of housing we're short. They'll see how many units of service that we have given in the course of every single day at the Navigation Center. And they'll see the successes we have had in getting people into healthcare, mental health, substance use, counseling, and ultimately housing.
You mentioned that this is sort of the perfect location for this type of thing, but is the vision still to have centers elsewhere in the city? I mean, how do you envision somebody in OB or, even Oceanside or somewhere like that getting services?
We did, and so we decided that the Navigation Center downtown, the skydiving center, it'd be nice to have a different name for that.
I think you should just own it. Just give everybody a suit when they come in.
Well, there were suits there. I suppose that could have been handled. At any rate, I like that question because we came to the realization that it doesn't help other communities that are plagued with homelessness if we only stay in the downtown, the epicenter, the East Village area. So we wrote a HEAP grant using the Navigation Center as the hub, and then we would have 4 other spokes in other communities that are negatively impacted by homelessness. And that was our plan, is to get the Navigation Center up, the HEAP grant comes right on top of it, and then we're able to take all those services to additional sites.
There's a lot of discussion right now about these allowing people to park somewhere at night. Yeah. And maybe even prohibiting them from sleeping in their cars at night on other streets, but in these safe parking lots they could be. Are you guys going to get involved in providing those services for those safe parking lots?
Well, it's funny that you ask because the city approached us and we gave a proposal to the city, which we understand from the situation that occurred that there are a lot of people that are they are disabled, right? They are on disability benefits. I mean, they clearly have gone through the vetting process and they are disabled. And their stated concern, and I certainly don't mean to speak for this population, but what I've read is their stated concern is they have disabilities that make it very difficult for them to access services. So knowing that, we decided that we would use 3 of our lots that are actually on the property of medical clinics. And our mantra is go to where the patients are. And if we have to go out to their car or their camper or their RV in our lot, then we will send our case managers or our mental health counselors or even our providers, our medical providers, out to talk with them there. If their anxiety or panic disorder or depression is so disabling that they cannot even come into the clinic, then we'll meet them on their own ground. The proposal that we submitted along with the budget was done last year, and up until actually this month, we felt that we were going to have 3 of those safe parking lot programs, but the city decided to go in a different direction. And so I don't even know if they'll be contracting with us or not. I think there were some stated concerns over if they contract with us, if they will be overparked. But I do know that the action cited something like over 800 people that are in their vehicles and as much as 2,000. So it really seems to me that having a safe parking lot program on the grounds of a medical clinic would be the way to go, as opposed to a parking lot, say, out on Friars Road that has no immediate access to services.
Well, I'll let you go soon, but I wanted to ask this. If you, one of the things that really frustrates me is we have a plan for how we're going to reduce greenhouse gases. We have a plan for how we're going to switch our power companies. We have a plan for getting rid of all waste to the landfill. We have a plan for getting rid of all traffic fatalities from pedestrians and car interactions. And yet we don't have a plan, an overall plan for how to address homelessness. And I keep getting told over and over, we're going to get one, we're going to get one, we're going to get one. Is that even comprehensible? Is that something we can even fathom? And if we did, what would it look like to you? What pieces would it have? And is it something we could execute on?
Big question. I think that what we are lacking is a comprehensive plan for how we're going to deal with the challenge of homelessness or homeless people. As I mentioned earlier, homelessness is caused by multiple societal failures. And so you just can't race to the blue light special or the shiny metal object where you go, look at here, okay, we'll do that, check. It really requires that the folks that are tasked with homeless initiatives in the city and the county, that they come together with the providers, the people that are out there slugging it out on the streets. I think about folks that are, rather unorthodox but effective. Bob McElroy comes to mind with Alpha Project. Jeannie McAllister comes to mind with the McAllister Institute. Joel Roberts with PATH. I mean, these are people that they know the dilemmas and the challenges and the problems with the city. And they're not just there with cup in hand going more. They would love to be at the table to come up with the solutions. But the solution can't be linear. It has to be so multifactorial, multi-tiered. We haven't even talked about the need for recuperative care beds. And I'm not talking about beds in a homeless shelter. I'm talking about, I cut my teeth on, hospital programs years ago in my career. So when I talk about subacute facilities or step-down facilities, the hospitals don't really have those any longer. And it takes $4 million or up to build one acute bed in a hospital. One acute bed. And yet, in one of our
$4 million?
$4 million to build one bed in an acute hospital. And one hospital, 3 weeks ago when I was talking to the administrator, had 26 people living in her hospital. And when you said, hey, how many of these could be discharged if you had a true medical recuperative care facility? No hesitation, all of them.
And so are you going to open a facility?
I want to open up a recuperative medical care facility. I absolutely do. And when I came back from Boston, I was on fire. I said, I'm going to open up a 24-bed facility. We're going to get this done. And I'm now up to 75 beds in my planning. And I'm hoping to God it'll be enough. And I don't think it will. I think we're going to have at least 2. But this is not a hospital buying a space in a rescue mission or a homeless shelter. This is absolutely 24-hour medical care for people that are not acute enough to be in the hospital, but are so incredibly sick they will die if you discharge them back to the streets. If you read the coroner's report in 2017, we lost 127 people who died on our streets. And when you read the print of the coroner's report, then you find out those people that actually were homeless and died on streets, 127, the folks that are under the care of a physician are not counted. So how many more people have died when homeless people, their life expectancy is in the low 50s? I've already surpassed that. We will probably all surpass that.
I got chills when you just said that. So that means 127 people who were living on the streets that year just died. Yeah. What
kind of city do we have right now? We need to get busy. And the planning isn't a paper document. The planning is coming to the table with everybody and doing what we need to do, taking care of people that by no fault of their own have ended up circumstances, whether they were in prison and they had no place to go, whether we don't have the mental health facilities, which we all know we don't, closing of state hospitals years ago. All of these things have contributed to the problem that we have right now.
I feel like there's so many people who say all these things that make them feel better about the situation, that they come here, they want to be here, they don't want to get help. It's almost like that it's a moral license for them to not worry about the situation. And what you're talking about is that it's just a thing that's been caused by all these different problems.
And by neglect and turning the other way.
Yeah.
And I think that's really a problem. And I'm not here saying all homeless people, let them go and do whatever they want, because we live in a community. We have responsibilities. There isn't anyone that has worked hard to buy a home that wants an RV unit or encampment parked out in front of their house or on their lawn, that they want to clean up trash from people that have left it. That is not where I'm at. If people come away from this podcast thinking, oh, that's what Fran Butler-Cohen said. No, I'm about personal responsibility. But personal responsibility means that city leaders, city staff, and the operators of homeless programs must come together quickly and do what we need to do. We can solve this problem.
Fran Butler-Cohen from Family Health Centers, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, coming up, a news story from the People's Report about what happens to the stuff that you put in your recycling bin. Not all of it gets recycled. We got a lot of listener questions about recycling, so Voice's Megan Wood dug into it.
Welcome to the People's Reporter, a Voice of San Diego feature that answers your questions. I'm Megan Wood. This week, we're diving into how the city handles residential recycling. Our question comes from Victoria Colhorse.
How do items in blue recycling bins get recycled? I have seen a lot of inappropriate items in blue bins, like fast food soda cups and straws, used pizza boxes, paper towels. How does this get handled?
Maybe this will sound familiar. Every other week, you roll your blue recycling bin to the curb. You look around and you see a plastic bag hanging out of your neighbor's bin, maybe even a greasy pizza box. That's common. The city's recycling manager, Ken Prue, says about 10,000 tons of inappropriate items are collected in blue bins each year, and then taken straight to the landfill.
Shoes, clothing, garden hoses, electric cords, electronics, even yard waste, or sometimes pieces of wood.
Ken says a bulk of these items can be recycled, just not in your blue bin.
Something like, say, plastic bags. You can take your clean plastic bags. If you can't reuse them, you can take them to the grocery store. Most grocery stores accept them. They either have a bin, or you can ask a bagger, a clerk, to take them, and they'll take them back, and they backhaul them to their distribution hubs, and ultimately it gets sent for recycling.
Here's how the recycling process works. Your recycling is picked up and taken to one of two material recovery facilities. These are private companies the city contracts with to handle the recycling. Your items make their way through machinery and several high-speed conveyor belts. There, workers sort the materials and toss out what they can't recycle. Then, the clean materials, mostly cardboards, plastic, and paper, are bundled up and sold off to manufacturers who can then use the materials to create new things. If you're like me, you might wonder if something can be recycled and then throw it in the bin anyway. Unfortunately, Ken said this actually does more harm than good.
I appreciate the thought or the sentiment of wanting to recycle the things, but it's really critical that people just put the correct materials in the bin. It's termed wishful recycling, where you hope it can get recycled, so you put it in, but we will actually ask people not to do that. Just really stick to the real, the core items.
Is there something about San Diego you want us to explain? Submit your questions to us, and they could be featured in a future story.
If you have a question you want us to look into, ask us at vosd.org/ask. Thanks for listening to the Voice of San Diego podcast. If you want to know what we're up to every day, subscribe to our newsletters. We have a lot of them. Get those at voiceofsandiego.org/newsletters. You can pick what you want: Border Report, Culture Report, just the Morning Report, and the Politics Report. Politics Report is really good Saturday morning politics report.
I just feel like the Sacramento report tees it up,
true.
with all of its insights and
It's
stuff.
nice-
And then you're like geared up to care about politics.
And then what we learn this week comes the next day and really
It's just
closes,
all really
puts
great.
a bookend on the whole thing.
It's a nice cycle. Yeah, exactly. I'm Scott Lewis, CEO and editor-in-chief of Voice. Andy Keats is assistant editor. Sarah Libby is managing editor. This show was produced by Nate John, Adriana Hildies, and Megan Wood. Talk to you next week.